So I was disturbed just now and had to interrupt it. I don't know how to resume it. So I just start from the beginning again. This is chapter 14 of Life as Carola. And Carola lived 500 years ago. She was banished from a castle. She was an illegitimate daughter of Lord Griffin. She is now on, she's a fugitive really, because she was a friend of a witch, which was, well, she wasn't a witch, but her friend Sophie was burned at the stake. They have now found shelter. The Conte'S Jest. Sometimes when we had made enough money at the last village, we lodged at a farmhouse instead of an inn. Early in May we came to a farm where we were made so welcome that we stayed for nearly a month. The farmer's wife told Petruchio that we could be her guest as long as it suited us. For the stories he told her more than paid for our food. She was very fat and wore dirty cotton dresses printed in wide stripes, which on her looked like the staves of a wine barrel. Her nose and mouth seemed ridiculously small for her large face, almost as if she had been blown up like a pig's bladder at a fair, and her eyes were black and glossy as currants. Even when she shouted at one of her many children or scolded her sour and withered little husband, there was a broad kindliness behind her anger. I have seen her hit her husband over the head with an iron ladle, so hard that it cut the skull, even through his thick hair, with as little malice as when she scolded the baby for trying to crawl into the hot ashes on the earth. She had a herd of goats, 6 nannies, and a fierce old billy goat, which she called Tonio, because she said it reminded her of her father-in-law. She would add, with a fat chuckle, looking towards her husband to see if she had roused him, "Old Tonio and young Tonio are like enough to be twins, instead of father and son." But her husband went on picking his teeth with a splinter of wood he had pulled off one of the benches, and pretended he had not heard. He hated the goat. He was always trying to persuade her to have its throat cut and let it go into a stew. But even when it ate all the young shoots of the vine arbor, or pulled down the clothesline and trampled on her best dress, which she had hung in the sun because she had overspiced it against the moth, she refused to have it beaten. I think she looked upon her husband and the goat in the same way. She thought it a weakness in herself to be so fond of them, but knew that in spite of the annoyance they caused her, she would weep bitterly when either of them died. And whenever she remembered this, she was grateful to them for being alive. Sometimes Petruchio told me stories that he never told to anyone else. I remember him saying, "The ears of a dwarf hear many strange tales that men conceal from people of their own stature. Sometimes they talk to me from their hearts, as they would talk to a favourite dog, without using words to conceal their secrets." He went on, "Once, when I was journeying through Tuscany with a troop of mummers, we were commanded to play at a banquet given in the honour of a prince of the church. A Conte, who was among the guests, found that I could easily provoke his laughter, and when he heard that I was making my way towards the south, he offered me a place in one of his baggage wagons, making it a condition that I must relieve his boredom during the 3 nights he would have to lodge in taverns before reaching his home. I agreed to go with him, though I wondered why he needed a jester to protect him from his thoughts, as I had heard that his young wife was famous for her beauty. During the journey he talked of the wars of the countries he had visited, but he never mentioned his wife, save on one occasion. He had invited me to travel in his coach, and he told me that the coffee, which he never allowed to be out of his sight, held gifts for her. The coffer held gifts for her. Gifts he had searched for far and wide to find, for her beauty was of such rare quality that only a subtle tribute was worthy of it. I expected that we should part at the last halting place, and I was surprised when he insisted on my accompanying him to his palazzo. When we alighted from his coach, he told me to take the coffer and follow him. I had been prepared to see a woman of uncommon quality, but his wife far exceeded the portrait that my thoughts had painted. She stood waiting for him in the great hall of his house, and he knelt to kiss her hand, as if he were her page. Her eyes were water green, her hair, netted with pearls, seemed alloyed of silver and gold. So pale and yet so brilliant was its sheen. He took the coffer from me and handed it to her, as if he were a vassal bringing tribute to a beloved prince. Before she opened it, he said, "I have searched Italy and France, sent my envoys into Spain for gifts worthy of you, gifts that will show you how well I know your heart. What do you think it is I have found for you? Has the sea given up her pearls, and will they die for envy of your skin? Or are there rubies carved in far Cathay to match your lips?" I could not understand why there was fear in her eyes as she lifted the lid. In it there was a ring, set with a fair emerald, a pair of velvet gloves embroidered with seed pearls, an enamel comfit box, and a dagger, its hilt finely wrought with precious stones. She stood looking not at the gifts but at her husband, as he said to her, "Once I would have plucked the stars to jewel your necklaces, or left the world in darkness, if you had craved the moon as a mirror for your tiring room. For when I saw only how fair you were, how wondrous your eyes, how infinite your grace, and when I led you to our marriage bed, I did not know the world held so much joy. Now these are the gifts I bring you, a ring to remind you of those solemn vows you pledged to me before the cardinal, these gloves to cover the white hands I kissed, this comfit box, does it hold sugar plums or pearls? The dagger, is it to defend you while you sleep alone when I must leave you?" His voice changed to mockery. "It is 3 years since you became my bride, 3 years whose days have built a tomb for love, 3 years in which you have revealed your heart. And then to me, now laugh, Petruchio. Often you made me laugh when I would weep. Look at her eyes and listen to my jest. The ring and gloves are poisoned. The comfit box holds a live scorpion, and she can breathe. She can sheathe the dagger in her heart." Chapter 15. The Santa Maria. Our wanderings had taken us eastward, and by the height of the summer, Petruchio and I came to a little village on the Adriatic coast. It was seldom that a vessel larger than a fishing boat anchored there, and when the Santa Maria was sighted coming round the headland, the whole village turned out to watch. She was foreign built, with blunt, clumsy lines, and, as I heard later, she had been captured from the Spanish by corsairs, and later retaken from them and sold as a trading ship. I was standing on the wooden jetty when the crew came ashore. The first man to land was very tall. He wore gold earrings, and his striped singlet was tucked into ragged breeches of grey worsted. His blue eyes looked strangely brilliant in the sun-dark face, and in spite of his clothes there was no doubting who was the captain of that motley crew. He asked me where he could replenish his water casks, and I showed him the way to the stream. If the breeze had held, he would have left the same evening, but by midday there was a flat calm, and he said that his men had worked hard enough warping Santa Maria to this anchorage, and they should rest until there came a favourable wind. The captain had led an adventurous life. He had a great fund of tales to tell, of skirmishes against pirates, and of the countries he had been to on his voyages. In 2 or 3 days he and Petruchio were like brothers. They used to sit outside the inn door on a bench in the sun, drinking the rough wine and talking so hard that they never noticed the time passing. Even when the days were hot, the air was fresher by the sea, and being with the captain, as we always called him, seemed to give Petruchio new strength, as if he were being refreshed from the other's strong vitality. For more than a year I had seen that Petruchio was growing steadily weaker. Though he refused to talk about it, I knew he was often in pain from the way he would press his hand to his side and catch his breath as if he had been stabbed by an invisible dagger. I had tried to make him go to see a physician, but he had only smiled and said, "They could not cure me, for I think my body so hates its own ugliness that it is trying to destroy itself." The night I woke to hear the wind blowing strongly from the south, I could have wept, for I knew it meant that the Santa Maria would continue on her voyage. The captain went on board at dawn, but there was no need of farewells. He had arranged with Petruchio for us to sail with him, and they had kept it a secret to surprise me. I've never been on the sea before, and I was very excited at my unfamiliar surroundings. I thought the Santa Maria was a mighty ship, for she was the largest I'd ever seen, but the captain laughed at me and said she would look like a rowing boat alongside any of the Spanish fleet, and if you saw one of those towering galleons on the horizon, you might think her great spread of sails was the cliffs of an island. I shared the stern cabin with both of them. The beams seemed to press down on me, and the captain warned me not to bump my head. His height was very troublesome to him in the confined space below decks, and he used to say, God forgot he was going to make me a sailor, or else that ships are made for little men. Though the cabin was shabby, it must have once been handsomely appointed. There were traces of gilt and vermilion on the carved mouldings, and the tattered brocade that covered the bench under the stern window was of fine quality. It was here that the captain kept the many strange relics he had collected in foreign lands. A piece of amber with a fly in it, carved coral, a heavy war club, a monkey skull said to have magical properties from the African coast. There was also a box of curious shells. As he showed them to me, he told me of the beaches from which they had come. The captain and any guests or passengers that he carried always drank wine. I was sorry for the sailors who had to drink from the water cask, for after about 10 days there was green scum on it. One of the men told me that on a long voyage the water became so foul that they had to hold their noses against the stink before they could swallow it without retching. We carried a mixed cargo: silk, some hogsheads of Spanish wine, salted fish, bark used in the tanning trade, and many other things I cannot remember. Few of the small towns along the coast had a good harbour. We anchored offshore, and the traders came out to us in fishing boats, or the captain went ashore to look for a new cargo. Sometimes he bought merchandise to trade, and sometimes he carried goods under charter. I was very happy during the 2 months we were on the ship. At times I wished that the captain had not a wife and 5 children living with his parents on a farm near Naples. He had not seen them for 3 years, so I doubt if he can have loved them very much, because then he might have asked me to remain with him. I think I should have done so if I'd had the chance. But first I should have made him promise not to leave me on land to have a lot of children I didn't want. Unfortunately, he seemed to look on me more as a child than a woman of 18, and he always treated me as if he were a kindly uncle. It was lucky that I never fell in love with him, otherwise I might have been very unhappy, instead of merely regretful that he could not follow the sea with a man of whom I was very fond. When we came into Venetian waters, we stood away from the coast. I had been hoping that at least I should see the town I had so often travelled towards and never reached. The captain never told me the reason why he thought it unwise to attempt trading there. Perhaps they were in a state of war, or it may only have been that the dues were too heavy. Soon afterwards we came to the great port of Trieste. The harbour was crowded with ships from many countries, men of war, coastal traders, merchantmen, ships from Spain so high out of the waters that they seemed top-heavy. The merchants who came aboard us used to sit for hours in the stern cabin, drinking wine with the captain while they haggled over the value of his cargo. When at last they were in agreement, bales or barrels would be taken up out of the hold and lowered into the little boat waiting alongside, while the two who had been arguing so fiercely parted from each other with many elaborate phrases of goodwill. It was a charter that sent us to Fiume. Until then, we had been fortunate in the weather. The sun shone nearly every day, and the sea remained blue and mild. We left Trieste with a favourable breeze and were out of sight of land before we saw storm clouds blowing up from the east. Waves seemed to follow us like angry serpents, towering to strike down our stern, but somehow we always seemed to outdistance them. I wanted to stay on deck, but I was ordered below. There was no light or air in the cabin, for wooden covers had been put over all the port lights, and the hatches were battened down. So violent was the storm that the ship drove forwards under bare yards, and the shrouds twanged like the devil's lute strings as the wind tore at them. After a time the wind lessened, but a high sea was still running, and the ships wallowed in the trough of the waves like a dying porpoise. It was so dark in the cabin that until the cook came in with some food for us and lit the lantern, I did not realize that Petruchia had been injured. A heavy chair had worked free from its lashing and fallen on his knees. The bone was not broken, but had begun to swell, and it looked very painful. Though I had put poultices of hot meal on it every hour, by the following night the flesh was still red and angry, and he could walk only with difficulty. Next morning the storm had abated. The sky was blue again, with high scuttling clouds, and we made fine speed under a full press of canvas. The captain said we should reach Fiume by the following evening, but it was 12 hours later than that when we tied up alongside the stony jetty. He went ashore at once, and when he came back from the town I could see he was disturbed about something. He told us he had been offered a very favourable charter to sail direct to the African coast. It would be a dangerous voyage, not only because he must reach his destination with all speed, and so would have to chance being many days out of sight of land, but also because it was rumoured that 3 other ships which had attempted to follow the same route had been taken by corsairs on the Barbary coast. He kept on stressing the dangers of the voyage. It seemed out of character for this man who laughed at danger to talk so much of it, until I realized that he was trying to tell us he could not take us with him. Petruchio was always quicker-witted than I was. He said that his leg would heal better on land than on sea, and that as he had always wanted to go to Fiume, it would suit us very well to be landed there. The captain at first protested against our leaving him, but we knew he was relieved. A woman and a cripple make poor additions to a fighting crew. At last it was arranged we should wait there till the Santa Maria returned. The captain was confident he would complete his voyage in 3 months, or if the winds were favourable, he might be back even sooner. So the Santa Maria sailed. We watched her until she was hull down on the horizon, and then Petruchio and I were alone in Fiume. I stop this here. Next chapter is Winter in Fiume. It's Friday, the 7th of July.